Luis, thank you for being here with me today. Let's talk about Senate Bill 12. But before we get into that, I just want to get some background on, exactly what you do, at Every Texan. Walk me through, your role.
Absolutely, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I'm our senior legislative director. So I help lead our team in advocacy around the state legislature predominantly, a little bit of federal and a little bit of local, but predominantly we are focused on people-centered policies at the Texas legislature. And what do we mean by people-centered? We mean things that are going to help communities, low-income communities, the general public. So, for example, funding for public schools, access to affordable health care, fair tax policy, and in some instances related to voting rights and immigration. But our bread and butter is about just fair systems that help the average Texan.
So I gotta ask, would you consider yourself a lobbyist?
Yes, I am a registered lobbyist. I always say I'm an advocate and a lobbyist, which means I do get paid to advocate for things that I'm very passionate about, things I believe in, and things that help the common interest. So I'm very blessed to be able to lobby for things that I'm proud to stand for.
And when do you get money? Now, sort of transitioning to the bill, do you get money personally from taxpayer funds?
No, we do not. We do not have any city contracts or county contracts or ISD contracts that ask us to lobby on their behalf. So we are not, personally benefiting from this legislation. We do have a mission driven around the area of preemption. And for your viewers, preemption is the issue where the state is prohibiting local city and counties from being able to enact policies at their local level. And so we do have some of our funding come to work on those issues through grants, but nothing that comes from the city, the county, or any of the political subdivisions.
But just to be clear, other parts, other, government entities do receive some money for lobbying. Is that correct? Because that's kind of the focus of this bill. I know there's been some discussion over that.
Right. There are some associations, Texas Association of Counties, for example, or the Texas Municipal League, that have dues or that have contracts with cities and counties that get paid to lobby on their behalf. And there are some private individuals who lobby on behalf of counties and cities, and they do that as a way to save money. It can be quite expensive, you can imagine, for the city of El Paso or Amarillo to be sending somebody every week to the Capitol in order to testify, meet with legislators, do those meetings. And so there's some shared costs through associations, and there's also saved money by hiring someone who, for a small fee, can do that advocacy and represent cities and counties at the Capitol.
In Senate Bill 12, brought forward by State Senator Mays Middleton, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, we did testify against it. And our major concern is, again, that we do think with this legislation, it will raise costs for cities. And the cities that we're talking about are the cities and counties that are far away from Austin, right? Austin and San Antonio, San Marcos can easily send representatives back and forth. But for those counties and cities, those rural counties that are far up in the panhandle, those small cities that are, 550 miles away, like El Paso, to be sending somebody every week on all the issues that affect their community. And we're talking about bills related to funding for counties. We're talking about election bills. We're talking criminal justice bills, education bills. All of these things have huge impacts in their community. And it is much more efficient and cost beneficial for a city or county to have somebody represent them up in Austin and not only track the bills and report back to them, but also advocate for them and share their position with their elected officials. It's easy to share with your local officials, but it's not so easy to share your position with all of the state reps and senators.
So you feel, this is part of the problem is just the size of Texas, just the vastness of the state.
I do. I do think that's a big component of it. I do think there's an equity concern about, making sure, particularly with small counties and small cities and far cities and counties, that there are some efficiencies, right? So, if you're a small county in the Panhandle, having a shared association or a shared lobbyist is much more cost beneficial than, sending your own personal employee week in and week out.
And when your group was testifying against this bill, did you feel as though, your positions, your concerns were heard?
I mean, I felt like the committee was respectful. They have seen this bill many times, right? This is the third or fourth session that this bill has come up. It has always failed in previous sessions. Sometimes, usually it fails on the House side. So the testimony was on the Senate side. We do expect the bill to move on the Senate side, but we do think cooler heads will prevail on the House side because they understand it. These representatives who represent these small communities and rural communities understand how difficult it is to not have representation at the Capitol, and generally that has been the chamber that has stopped the bill. So I do think it is heard and perceived, even if it's not necessarily at the Senate committee where I testified.
Why do you feel as though this bill keeps being brought up, session after session after session, as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's certainly some, obviously some politics behind it. It is that word lobbyist has a lot of connotation, right? You hear the word lobbyist, and a lot of people feel like, oh, we don't want to be paying for lobbyists, and I get that. But I think people need to understand that a lobbyist is someone who represents someone and expresses a viewpoint of that community. And so, while it is sometimes a word that is misunderstood, the important part is that cities and counties just need to be heard in the state legislature. And I think that's the part that gets lost a little bit by the proponents of this bill.
Going off of that, if this bill ultimately does pass, what impact do you feel it will have?
Yeah, I do think it'll raise the cost for cities and counties. They will now have to send personal employees or have to send their council member or county commissioner week in and week out. So that's huge travel costs. I do think they will have to rely on other forms of communication as well, which means their voice may not be heard as well. And I do think it's just going to be inefficient. I think a lot of counties and cities will be, trying to figure out new creative ways to get heard. And I feel like it won't really reduce the influence of lobbying, but it will, change the way it's done, and raise costs for cities and counties to have to hire individual employees who are doing it, on their behalf as opposed to an association or through a private entity.
Senator Middleton, who's brought forth this bill, has said that certain groups, just basically should be getting paid for advocating some of these positions. I just want to get your overall thoughts on what his concerns have been, putting this forward. Do you feel as though there's any, I guess, validity to any of that?
Yeah, and what I heard from the testimony is there's concerns that a city will hire a lobbyist and take a position that many in the community may not support. And they will bring up different types of examples. But I think that's the case for any representation, right? So, in Austin, we have, conservatives who don't feel like their voice is represented through their legislators. In more progressive, in more conservative places, there are progressives that don't feel their voice is heard through their own individuals. And so these associations and counties are trying to just take the aggregate position of what is beneficial for most of their members. And there's always going to be some disagreement and some variation. But that doesn't mean we should just throw out the whole thing with the bath, throw out the whole thing with the bathwater. The point is that that voice still needs to be represented. And I think most importantly, we got to have an efficient system. Trying to have 254 counties and the thousands of cities come in every week for the legislature. It's just not efficient, not a good way to get the information out. Legislators rely on associations like the Texas Association of Counties and the Texas Municipal League to understand what the position is generally of what a city and counties, and will it raise their costs? Will it work for counties? Is this bill or legislation going to be even feasible? And that is an important voice that I really hope we don't lose at the Texas legislature.
Is lobbying, you feel, though, the only voice that these constituents who may be far away have?
No, absolutely not. Of course, you always are free to call different members, but I will tell you, as someone as a staffer, when a constituent from another representative calls you, it doesn't raise the same level, right? So if you are representing the area of San Antonio and somebody from Amarillo calls you and says, "Hey, this bill is really going to affect us in Amarillo," you're like, "Well, I don't represent Amarillo. Those are not my constituents." But if the Texas Municipal League comes and says, "Hey, this is going to impact a lot of cities. This is going to affect, 25 cities, and it's going to raise our costs, and it's going to be a huge burden," that's going to raise a different level. And so I know that that's not the only way to get your voice out. But the reality is there is a role for these associations.